And there is a sense of hope. And there is a sense of hope that there is a new emerging model of church that hopefully will support each and every one of us in our ministries. So, as Pope Francis has said, he says the time has come to let the Holy Spirit kind of breathe new life into our future conversations. And I'm often asked that question, like, what about young people? How do they fit into this bigger picture? And over the years, I've chronicled many different milestones of the young church, as we would call it here in Ireland, for over 30 years. And the very first book I wrote, if you can see it, it's called Are We Losing the Young Church? Okay. And that was a history of young people within the Irish church, kind of from the Second Vatican Council up to approximately 2005. And a constant theme that I've often been kind of presented with is how do we engage with our younger adults? A constant pattern of leadership or lack of leadership or investment in young adult ministry over the years has probably led now to an emerging crisis that many of our bishops and many of our other kind of leaders are beginning to notice they don't actually have the millennial or the Generation X or the Gen Z with them at this stage. So the youth ministry is minimal when compared to mainline youth work. And I come from a background of straightforward youth work in youth clubs and sport. And our parishes have now become accustomed to not having young people. And I think this is regrettable. We've actually grown to be okay with that space that there are no young people there. It's also a difficult journey for young people to remain part of church. And that came through the Youth Synod as well. And from the 1980s, the Irish bishops here have kind of had a pastoral on young people. It was called Listen to Youth, Listen to the Young. And within that, they repeatedly spoke about listening to young people. And sadly, many of those generations of young people that followed from the 80s, the 90s, the millennial years, many have actually gone off unheard and are very disconnected. And they're now our parents and our grandparents. Here in Ireland, there's a shadow of abuse since the 1990s, and that actually has had an impact on our ministries as well. And creating a space for youth and young adult ministry has never been easy in the Irish Church. And over the past 10 years, there have been different youth initiatives as well. And I think that also has kind of dovetailed with vocational ministry as well. Some of our best youth leaders have left. Some of the leaders who were engaged with the Synod and young people are no longer employed by church. So that's the challenge that we're facing at, that if we don't have vibrant, kind of vocational ministry as well. So today we're kind of reflecting on the question of my takeaways from the Christus Vivit. And Christus Vivit came out in 2019, I think it was, in the Lent. And one person said to me, that it was such a joy to see this publication coming into the public domain. And for now, for any of us working in youth and young adult ministry, and especially vocational ministry, we now had a text to accompany some of the theology that were emerging. So we now have this reflective document by Pope Francis on the topic of young people in the church. And it came through an extensive listening and consultation with young people throughout the world. And Christus Vivit says it's not a manual of youth ministry or a practical guide. So if you read Christus Vivit, you'll not find the magic bullet as to what to do. It's a reflective document of hope and of challenge, resulting in an extensive synodal listening to young people and their leaders and the entire church. And then if you see on the red image, you see Exploring Christus Vivit, which was a book that I compiled of various contributors reflecting on each of those questions or each of those chapters within Christus Vivit. It's like a little study text that accompanies Christus Vivit. It can be read in a group, it can be read on your own. There are discussion questions as well. So the power of storytelling comes through Christus Vivit. It explains to the reader, who is this Jesus person? It explains the question of good news. It spends two particular chapters on vocational discernment and vocational choices, the very last two pieces. And they're the chapters that I will focus on later on. Christus Vivit, as it says, while addressed to the youth of the world and the entire people of the world, it's not a manual, as I've mentioned, but it's personal, it's reflective, it's a document of hope and of challenge, and it's the fruit of this synodal process. And again, as Pope Francis said here in the quote in paragraph 203, he says, he will not attempt here to propose a kind of manual of youth ministry or a practical pastoral guide. However, it's probably one of the most readable post kind of Second Vatican Council documents. It's written almost in a letter style, probably in the pen of Pope Francis as well. So in the months that followed, the publication of Christus Vivit. I worked with some of my leaders here in Dublin effectively, and we did a Christus Vivit roadshow, we called it. And we went to different parishes in different areas around the greater Dublin area, gathering young adults, teachers, those active in pastoral ministry, those in parishes, and we reflected on the key themes that were emerging from the exhortation. And some of them talked about ongoing challenges, how to establish and to resource and imagine a younger church active across all areas of pastoral ministry. And at the time of kind of this 2018, 2019, there was a sense of energy in attempting to revitalize local youth structures in our parishes and our ministries and our campuses. Pope Francis has given us the ingredients for developing and initiating youth and young adult ministry. He has proposed this model of church that listens to young people. And he also goes on to note that we need to make more room for the voices of young people to be heard. And it's up to the pastoral leaders, this is my words, now to reflect on how they have continued to listen to young people. And I also recall some of the Irish synodal fathers who promised more resources for ministry to young people. And regrettably, not much has happened at a national level here in Ireland, and I'm not sure about your own countries, around the follow-up and the follow-through of some of the proposals within Christus Vivit. Just to kind of give you a little explanation as to the background, there's no magic bullet in Christus Vivit on how to begin a youth program. It's a document centered on Jesus Christ. It also focuses on the young people. He calls it the now of God. He speaks about young people being active protagonists in our world, helping to enrich it. And I suppose the journey of this document kind of began just immediately after the Krakow World Youth Day in Poland. And that was the year of mercy coming to a conclusion as well. So it was announced in 2018, October, that he would have a synod on young people, faith and vocational discernment. And again, I think it's important that that word vocational discernment was within the document and within the listening process. It was probably the biggest listening program ever directed at young adults from age 16 to 29. It was worldwide. Some of it was face-to-face, many of it was digital, and some of it was in group form. And in March 2018, the Pope invited young people together in Rome in a pre-synod kind of conversation. And I think that actually helped frame some of the discussions that took place in the synod, because not always the views of, say, the Irish or the Americans were similar to the young people's views, say, from Africa or the Far East. So we had a process here in Ireland of listening in each diocese, in each university. I even went into a prison to listen to some of our younger people who were in prison. We began this whole question of listening in a whole new way. Pope Francis has also been critical that the church has dictated to young people a series of prepackaged questions. He also acknowledges that there are many complex realities that face younger people. And the reason that we know this, and he says it himself, is that actually he has walked the path of them. He has sat in these gatherings in Rome and listened to them. And he goes into Christus Vivit in chapter 127. He says, do not be afraid to go, bring Christ into area of life, to the fringes of society, and even to those who seem farthest away and most indifferent. So he really is challenging our young adults, our leaders, to kind of be urgent in terms of tone, in terms of how you converse with the people who are probably more farthest away and most indifferent. His message for young people is clear. He says, don't wait until tomorrow to contribute your energy or your audacity or your creativity to our changing world. So he's clearly putting young people in the frame that they have to be the protagonists for change in our world. He has also noted the intergenerational nature of pastoral relationships, and I see various different generations here on this particular call. And he speaks about the preserved memory. And this is where he kind of links in older people within church to our younger people. That preserved memory, he calls it roots, that we also have to know where we've come from. So he gives many examples of young people who became saints. He speaks about older people who made a contribution to faith. And again, bringing those generations together is important. He would like to see more energy by young people in the life of the church. And again, if you look at the church that you attend or the church that you're part of, are young people part of that model? And I think that's the challenge to each of us in leadership, or those who are actually involved with inviting young people to consider that vocational call to whatever that leads. So the enthusiasm of the youth is also needed in the church too. And again, he goes on to kind of speak about the periphery of young people. And I think that's important, that as I begin now to look at a lot of the youth programs in Ireland, many of them are actually one-dimensional. It's the same type of young people going to the same type of events. It's the same type of young person stepping forward to, discern vocation. And we're not really hitting some kind of parts of the constituency of young people. So I've mentioned that Christus Vivit reads like a letter. It's coming from this synodal process. And I love the opening sentence in it. It says, Christ is alive. He is our hope. And in a wonderful way, he brings youth to the world. And the very first words then that I would like to say to every young Christian are, Christ is alive and he wants you to be alive. So that's the tone of Pope Francis reaching out to young people by one, invite them to have a personal relationship with Christ, but he also wants young people to be alive with Christ as well. So the basic chapters, and I'm not going to dwell on these, but there are kind of 9 chapters in Christus Vivit. The first is actually about the Word of God and what has that got to say to young people. Then it's got Jesus ever young, and he kind of has biblical examples of Jesus. He speaks about young people being the now of God, as in it's not about young people doing stuff tomorrow. It's actually now. And I think we can frame young religious in this as well. We shouldn't be waiting for them either to be ordained or professed before inviting them into vocational ministry. It's actually now is the important time for them to share their stories. He has a couple of chapters around kind of the what is youth ministry. I mentioned the one on youth on roots. And then I think the last 2 chapters are critical for this conversation. The question of vocation, and it's not just vocation to religious life or priesthood. It's actually the vocation, the call of baptism to be something different and do something with your life and saying yes to God. And then that lovely Jesuitical word that has come into almost everything Pope Francis has spoken about is discernment, and learning how to discern and how to kind of reflect and listen and in society. So I mentioned earlier, it's not a magic bullet that will actually fix the problem of our ministries. It's not that magic bullet. However, it won't give you a manual of how to do youth ministry. You won't get 5 ideas in it. But what you might do is get inspired kind of to reframe how you do your ministry. It will propose that starting point that Jesus is the beginning part, his message, his call, the discernment and purpose, and that's the vocational part of Christus Vivit. So that's kind of where we're coming at now. So that in our ministries of reaching out to younger people who might be discerning vocation, or you might be promoting vocation, it's actually about proposing the starting point of Jesus, beginning there and reflecting on the message, but also that question of discernment of purpose. And I suppose if any of you are into social media, there's a lot of young people searching online for voices of influence. Now, sometimes that can bring them on the wrong path, but it's also a place that vocational ministry needs to be in the middle of the social media. I call it the public square, but I think we need to be there as well. So what actually happened with Christus Vivit, and where did it go wrong, probably is another question. Is the minute Christus Vivit came out, there was about a 12-month period where it was being read. I did an audit of Irish dioceses. Only 2 or 3 dioceses actually had done anything around the rollout of the program of Christus Vivit. And it was that reason that I decided to approach a publisher here in Ireland to come up with the book of Exploring Christus Vivit. There might be some familiar faces here who are people who would have worked with me over the years. At the very bottom, you have the Archbishop of Armagh. He attended the Synod on Young People, Emma Martin. You see Sister Natalie, probably the most famous woman now in the Vatican, and Paul Jarzembowski from the United States Bishops' Conference. Top right is Dermot Kelly, who works for the Redemptorists. These are all people who we would have collaborated with over the years on various programs and pilgrimages. So the idea with that was a study text to reflect and begin the discussions around young people. So during the COVID moment, actually, we had to be inventive. So we ended up having online study sessions of Christus Vivit with youth leaders, with parishes, with parents. There was nothing else to do during COVID because we were all at home. So we actually brought probably Christus Vivit to a very more diverse kind of an audience. So are we listening? Is the question to the younger generation. And on the 5th anniversary of the Christus Vivit exhortation, Pope Francis invited young people to make their voices heard as a way of bearing witness before everyone. And I suppose that's the kind of the key question as well. Inviting young people to make their voices heard. Again, look at the church that you are operating in, the community that you're living in. Are you listening to the voices of our younger people? The younger people who are maybe presenting for vocational ministry or discernment, are we hearing their voices? Or what witness are we providing to them? As he mentioned at the beginning words of Christ is alive, I would like my words to be a source of renewed hope to young people who may feel discouraged by a world marked with so many conflicts and so much suffering. And I suppose if we look at the world today, there is an awful lot of suffering, whether you're in South Sudan, whether you're in Gaza or the Holy Land or Israel, whether you're in Ukraine or whether we even in Russia. There's many, many different parts of our world that are suffering. And sometimes within that, we have young people who are asking for peace or for change. You think of the Greta Thunbergs and climate. Our young people are very angry that the world that they're inheriting is not a very nice world for their grandchildren. So again, to be synodal means to journey with these young people who may not believe in a way that we believe or belong in a way that you belong. And I think we need to find new ways of being co-responsible together. And I suppose that's a challenge as well. So where do I propose? I think sometimes you kind of have to look back to look forward. And if I kind of dig a little bit deeper into this, is over the past 10 years, say here in the Irish church, again, it might be similar in your church, there has been a gradual downsizing of young adult ministry, whether that's intentional or accidental. There are probably now less young people working in this area, less resources provided for it, and less opportunities for young people to gather in a faith context. So the traditional age for youth or young adult ministry is around 17, 18 upwards. So that's kind of where we're coming from. But almost 20 years ago, when I researched that history of young adult ministry in Ireland, I also said at the time, youth ministry may be in decline, but it's not terminal. And but presently, if I were to update that now, based on the lower numbers of younger people engaging with church or voluntary youth ministry initiatives, I believe serious questions now need to be asked of those who would like to see a young church emerge again. This will involve dioceses, religious orders, those directly involved in all these ministries with our younger people. It will involve new collaborations and new structures. And again, I'm also working with religious orders in my capacity as Secretary General of the large organization that works with the religious and the missionaries. Some of them are coming to completion. So the vocational ministry has stopped for some congregations, and yet for some of our younger congregations that are new to Ireland, they're very much open to vocational discernment. At one point, young adult ministry was extremely popular. The same could be said for vocations ministry. At one point, it was extremely popular, but I think that view now has changed. It's probably now one of the most kind of challenging areas in pastoral ministry today, working with and walking with younger people who are discerning a purpose or discerning a call. And it has shifted from being success driven to being a marginal ministry. So if we look around our congregations or our dioceses, there are less people now involved in outreaching to younger people, asking questions about purpose and asking questions about maybe your plan ahead. So from my personal experience, a huge amount of resources goes into education or catechetical ministry. Very little resources are actually segregated for proper programs of evangelization. The catechesis is not effective if there's no evangelical method that underplays that. If we go back to Christus Vivit, Christ is alive, that there's no point telling young people Christ is alive if they've never actually encountered Christ in a significant way. Pope Francis has invited the local church to take a more serious kind of attitude now towards catechetical formation. And whilst that is welcomed, I still think there needs to be a recognition that the structures and the methods of passing on faith here in Western Europe needs to be changed or needs to be reviewed. It could be argued that those aged under 40 have been badly served by and poorly served by pastoral ministry programs. It really hasn't connected to them. That whenever the culture shifted, their faith wasn't able to kind of move with that kind of change as well. And it's not about being nostalgic about the past, about the high numbers. I think we need to be also real that if we are firmly believing that God is a discerning God, that God is a revealing God, well, then we have to find conversational ways of talking with our younger people to see has God been revealed to them, and maybe that's the purpose as well. I was struck by a poll here in Ireland. It was a kind of a national polling company, and they said that after the pandemic, while that there was a huge impact on the pandemic on our younger people, 27% cited they attended mass before COVID. Asked about returning to mass, 19% noted they didn't know, and many others noted that they wouldn't come back. And I think the COVID experience or experiment or whatever happened at that point in time, it's been very clear now that that has had a huge impact in many of our pastoral programs. We live in a country here in Ireland where 14% of the population now declare no religion. 64% are now practicing Catholics within Ireland or citing their faith. And that's down from 96% about 40 years ago. So Ireland is actually changing quite a lot. And if I pay attention to the details of those aged 25 to 29, that kind of age, um, the millennial generation is certainly less religious or not religious at all. So this rapid decline is not unique to Ireland. It's the same whether you're in the UK, probably the US. I'm not sure about Trinidad who are here as well, or Newfoundland. So there's a whole change around how people belong or believe, and that's quite different. And this is a whole new territory for us as well. Ireland is no longer this Catholic country that would have the notion overseas. Many of our younger people, aged under 40, are quite distant now from church, and that has a direct impact on our ministry programs as well as we outreach. Ireland is a very progressive country now, probably one of the most liberal and countries with freedom of expression and inclusion for everyone. And that actually liberal journey has taken place very fast. Um, for many of our millennial generation, religion hasn't played parts of their life. But that doesn't mean to say, or does that shouldn't stop us or prevent us having conversations in that kind of space. So I'm giving you this reality because you know that many of our programs here in Ireland that were natural places for vocational conversation have actually gone. So the Catholic footprint, the Catholic outreach to younger people has changed in the last number of years, and that provides probably less opportunities for young adult ministry going forward. Just digging inside a little bit of it as well. The first two chapters highlight that God has been and continues to be active in the world. And if you actually believe that statement, well, then that means that there's a relevance for your ministry, for your ongoing ministries and outreach to our younger people who might be discernment. And I think that's the key thing as well. Sorry. The other thing is we actually forget that Jesus was a young person, you know, and I think that's the second conversation or second chapter within Christus Vivit, an illustration of young people who have gone on and done mighty stuff with their faith, who became saints. And I think we need kind of role models as well. I don't think we need that one. I think there's three central truths within the document as well. It's very positive. It's about Christ loving you, about Christ saving you, and that Christ is alive. You also see in Paro 21, he invites people, young people, to be courageous missionaries. And again, where I work is we're a missionary organization as well, outreaching to young people. And we're deeply impressed with the Irish missionaries overseas. But actually, when they come back and tell their stories here in Ireland to younger people today, it's a very different topic. They've never met some of these missionaries who've done amazing kind of work in Africa or the Far East or in Latin America. So I think being courageous missionaries now, we need to prepare younger people who have faith here almost to be missionary in their culture, in their country. They don't actually need to leave and go overseas to be missionaries. Again, this question about bringing Christ to the fringes. Some of our most recent young people who have gone down the path of religious life or discernment are actually coming probably sometimes from non-church backgrounds. That it actually is an awakening of faith that has taken place as they get older. So again, I think we need to be also clear that when we go to the fringes, we're probably going to be inviting young people who might get into discernment programs who may not actually be 100% signed up to church or understanding of faith. And again, I've mentioned that intergenerational church as well. Cardinal Lustiger, formerly of Paris, once said, he says, we get the youth we deserve. And he argued that there wasn't as much a gap between church and young adults, rather than young people find it hard to find their place within the church. He was saying that over 20 years ago. So our parishes, our dioceses, our campus programs are finding it hard to get this traction with our younger people. And I think it's also connected to the investment as well. So how we invest both our time and our talent in this area as well. And I think that's a key thing as well. So the other point just to make is our ministry probably has to adapt. I have an image here of green shoots. People kind of slag me or give out to me for being too hopeful at times, but I don't see it as a bleak picture around where we're at. I do think there has to be new ways to find outreaches to younger people today. That lovely line from the Psalms kind of speaking about singing a new song to the Lord. I think we have to find the new melody for this generation to be reflective and to be discerning in terms of ministry as well. I think our ministry has become focused on the few and not the many. That I think we have to find new ways of getting into calling and serving young people to be kind of part of life as well. I think we need to be flexible. in our approach. Sometimes our formation programs are not terribly flexible. So we probably need a new style or a new strategy or a new tone for how we invite young people to walk our path. And again, we're also judged by outreach and growth. That one or two of the religious orders here in Ireland are often kind of how would you say it? They still are attracting vocations, and but part of the reason that they're still attracting or open to vocations is they actually go to where young and youth culture is. So they go to retreats, they go to events, they go to campuses, they wear habits, they are visible. So that the invisible approach of the past is not the kind of the way that we need to be as well. So paragraph 276 in Christus Vivit says about in discerning your vocation, do not dismiss the possibility of devoting yourself to God, whether it be priesthood, religious life, or other forms of consecration. Why not? Pope Francis says, you can be sure that if you do recognize and follow a call from God, there you will find complete fulfillment. We have a very restless generation, and if we were able to offer them just that kind of promise of fulfillment, probably we would change an awful lot of the issues that are within society around their violence or mental health, all these kind of things that our younger people are experiencing. And again, it's back to us, everyone here on this call. It's how we witness as well and how we invite. I suppose that's the question then that I'd like to leave with yourselves is that as you begin to look at your space and your ministry and your outreach or your approach to vocational ministry or how you support people who are discerning, like what are you learning from noticing the conversation that you're having? Who are the type of people that are coming to you? What public square are you in is the other question. And what are the aspects of youth and young adult culture that you're not present in? And I suppose that's the question that I'd be kind of leaving with yourselves today. Debbie, I'm kind of coming to the end here. Is that okay for you? Am I on time? Yeah. So what I'm going to do is
Yes,
I'm just going
sorry
to
about
leave you
that.
with a
You're,
pardon. Yeah.
you're good.
Okay.
I'm just adding countries behind people's names, so I was muted. So all is
Okay.
well. Thank you.
So these are the two takeaways, right? The very end of the document speaks about wait for the church to catch up. The very last sentence of Christus Vivit is about the urgency of doing this. So again, I go back to Christus Vivit. The church needs the momentum, the intuitions, your faith. We need them. And when you arrive where we have not yet reached, have the patience to wait for us. So I think Pope Francis is recognizing kind of younger people do things very fast or urgent or spontaneous. Church moves very slow, as you know the old phrase. The church moves in centuries, not in minutes. So it's that kind of phrase as well that younger people probably kind of are way ahead of where we're at in terms of our ministry. And I suppose the starting point is a hopeful one. That if we actually begin with the part that Christ is alive and not dead, all our ministry and all our outreach can begin with the risen Christ. And that's this transformational story that we all can kind of engage with as well. Recently, we had a gathering of some young religious, and I suppose that's part of it as well. I see some familiar faces here on this call. The very bottom picture is a group of young religious who recently professed here in Ireland. I met them a couple of weeks ago. Margaret here, you probably see our the capuchin, the Carmelites in the top right hand corner. We go to the National Ploughing Championships and we bring young religious to that. And that's the biggest event outside of Dublin. It's an agricultural event, but every aspect of Irish life is at it. And I think I'm very proud that Margaret goes every year. We have conversations with people, conversations like people had forgotten young people still have vocations, that young people are still discerning commitment. And I suppose that's part of it as well. It's being visible rather than the invisible. Lots of our younger religious, they're not actually worried about the future, and they're very much real about, that they are living in aging communities, and yet they're younger people. So it's important for myself or for Margaret or for others working in this area, it's to keep them connected and keep them alive as well, and as they nurture religious life as they go forward. Socrates, I'll bring in a little bit of philosophy here. He said the unexamined life isn't worth living. Okay, so in discerning vocation, again from Christus Vivit, do not dismiss the possibility of devoting yourself to God whether it be priesthood, religious life, or other forms of consecration. Again, that's the question as to why not. So the examining the life is probably the greatest contribution we can make to our younger people. Again, he kind of says that your own personal vocation does not exist only in the work that you do, but through the expression of it. And again, there's some lovely little kind of takeaways from Christus Vivit around reflection and examination of life as well. So, vocation is understood as a service to others. Okay, discernment and accompaniment are key elements in our support of our younger people. So, if we're serious about a vocational outreach, then I think we have to also provide pathways for discernment, for accompaniment, for being present with young people wherever they're at. And it's from that probably that they will get signposts for vocational questions that they may have, whether that be for the religious life part, or maybe that could be for marriage or for singlehood or whatever. But again, if they begin this process, they're beginning it with people who walk this way. One of the lovely images of youth and young adult ministry is the story of the road to Emmaus, being able to accompany people who are discerning purpose or discerning something that went wrong or there's something that changed, but actually having the ability to be able to walk alongside people, probably see transformation or maybe say something, that will trigger a change within them. That's the key piece as well. Is around being a service to others. Vocational ministry is not about kind of maximum numbers kind of attending religious life. It's actually about helping change young people's direction if they're open to changing it. And so again, it's been active, it's been present. It's about being servant to them as well. So it's the servant leadership as well that comes into this as well. But ultimately, if you're going to have a vocational ministry, you have to enjoy working with younger people as well. They may not be doing things the way that you would do them, but I think we have to be in that space. And again, as somebody of my age, I have 3 young adult children. I think being able to kind of converse with that generation to find out what their hopes, their needs, their dreams, their concerns are is vital. And for religious life will have a future and a purpose going forward. But I think we have to take a more active role within our society, our community that we're living in as well. I'm going to come to a pause, I think, here now, and I'll stop sharing if that's okay, or I'll go to